If it's Tuesday, President Trump lashes out at Democrats, saying they are, quote, like insurrectionists, and he floats invoking a 200-year-old law to expand his power to mobilize the military in Democratic-run cities as the legal and political fight over troop deployments escalates. Plus, shutdown, day 7. The White House ramps up its threats against furloughed federal workers, now suggesting it could withhold their back pay, circumventing current law, amid the ongoing uncertainty surrounding potential mass layoffs. And from Washington to Tel Aviv, the world marks 2 years since Hamas's horrific October 7th attack on Israel, which plummeted Gaza and the region into a catastrophic war and humanitarian crisis, as negotiators meet again to hammer out details of President Trump's peace plan. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington, where President Trump and his team are escalating their legal and political fight with Democrats, while seemingly laying the groundwork to invoke a rarely used law from 1807 that gives the president emergency powers to defend the country against a rebellion. It comes as the administration pushes for additional military deployments into Democratic-run cities and tries to paint Democrats as literal insurrectionists. Speaking in the Oval Office today while meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister, President Trump once again refused to rule out invoking the Insurrection Act amid his effort to deploy the National Guard to cities like Portland and Chicago.
Can we talk about Portland for a second? Are you planning to invoke the Insurrection Act? And that would be, a very long-standing law that's been on the books.
Yeah, well, it's been invoked before, as you know. If you look at Chicago, Chicago's a great city where there's a lot of crime. And if the governor can't do the job, we'll do the job. It's all very simple.
The president and his senior advisor, Stephen Miller, have both ramped up their rhetoric around the Insurrection Act. Here's some of what they've said in just the last 24 hours.
These Democrats are like insurrectionists, okay? They're so bad for our country. Their policy is so bad for our country.
If you take a look at what's been going on in Portland, it's been going on for a long time, and that's insurrection. I mean, that's pure insurrection.
Portland's been on fire for years, and not so much saving it. We have to save something else, because I think that's all insurrection. I really think that's really criminal insurrection.
There's an effort to delegitimize the core function of the federal government of enforcing our immigration laws and our sovereignty. It is domestic terrorism. It is insurrection. This is an all-out campaign of insurrection against the sovereignty of the United States, because the Democrat Party and those who are committing violence in this country do not believe in the legitimacy of the sovereign territory of the United States.
Right now, a court order is blocking military deployments to Portland, and a judge in Illinois is considering whether to temporarily block a similar deployment of National Guard troops to Chicago. But pending a ruling, President Trump and his allies appear ready to begin those deployments. It all comes as Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee today, with Democrats accusing the president of using the DOJ as a political weapon against his rivals. The hearing was combative at times, with Bondi repeatedly dodging their questions and criticisms.
Were you consulted by the White House before they deployed National Guard troops to cities in the United States?
I am not going to discuss any internal conversations with the White House.
I was going to ask you if you received advice, instruction, or request from anyone at the White House to direct the department to engage in any investigations, prosecutorial actions, including decisions not to investigate or prosecute anyone.
I'm not going to discuss it.
I'd like to know from you what conversations you've had with President Trump about the indictment of James Comey.
Senator, I am not going to discuss any conversations I have or have not had with the President of the United States. Did you see that?
And joining me now is our team of reporters. NBC White House reporter Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, and NBC News Senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Thank you all so much for joining me. Yamiche, I want to start with you. What are you hearing behind the scenes? How seriously is the administration considering the Insurrection Act?
It's a good question. We know that the president has brought it up. We know, of course, that top White House advisor Stephen Miller has also brought up using this act, but it's not clear that the president is leaning toward that, though I should tell you in a conversation that I had with the president about a week ago, he brought up the word insurrection, talking about what he saw as happening in Portland without me bringing up the word insurrection. So it tells you that it's sort of in the ethos and on his mind. It will be very interesting to see whether or not he actually leans into that strategy, given the fact that he's now running into these roadblocks with governors saying that they don't want to give their National Guard to the president, and of course with these court battles that he's losing, Gabe.
And Julie, I want to bring you in. What would it mean in practice if the administration were to invoke the Insurrection Act?
Well, look, I mean, the Insurrection Act is there for the United States to be able to protect itself against an insurrection, an uprising from within the interior of the country rather than being attacked from the outside. And so it allows the military to break from this longstanding rule of posa comitatus, which keeps the military from enforcing domestic law. So it would allow the military to go into these cities, throw away those restrictions, and start acting like a military against an insurrection.
What defines an insurrection?
Well, that's a good question, and I've been reading up on that more today, as you might expect. And in fact, actually, it's not that rare. This is actually the longest period in history we've gone without invoking the Insurrection Act. The last time it was invoked was 1992 by George H.W. Bush after the riots and protests that broke out in Los Angeles following the police brutality incident of Rodney King. Insurrection Act was called there so that they could try to enforce more law and order in the city of Los Angeles. Of course, that didn't come without some controversy as well. It was also used during the civil rights movement by Lyndon Johnson to make sure that children could safely go to schools as they were integrating in the South. It's not unheard of, but in this case, I think the reason why we're all talking about it more is how is the White House going to change and kind of redefine what's happening in cities like Chicago and Portland to make it appear as if there's an insurrection without a real clear line about what exactly it is that needs to be crossed for them to do that.
Well, they're certainly testing the limits of executive power. Yamiche, really quickly, how confident is the White House when it comes to these legal cases? Do they just see this as a political winner for them?
Well, Gabe, I'm sure as you're talking to your sources and I'm talking to mine, we both are hearing the same echoes, which is every time the White House loses a legal battle, every time the president is told by a federal judge that he can't do something, the White House looks to the Supreme Court to solve that. And in most cases, and case after case, we've seen the Supreme Court side with the president. Now, of course, the Supreme Court hasn't sided with the president on everything, but the president really does see the Supreme Court in this 6-3 conservative majority, which, of course, he added to during his first term as a sort of safety net in his mind, as him losing in the lower courts really doesn't mean anything, because he really does believe in most cases he'll be able to win in the Supreme Court. Now, whether or not that means that he'll ultimately win, especially when it comes to trying to federalize the National Guard and send them into these Democratic-run cities, is a big question. But the president continues to really believe that every time he loses, he can just appeal to the Supreme Court and get his way.
And I want to get to Kelly in a minute about the grilling that Attorney General Pam Bondi had on Capitol Hill today. But Julia, before I let you go, she did say today that senior administration officials are heading to Chicago. What do we expect the National Guard troops will be doing in the Windy City?
Well, we understand that some National Guard troops from Texas have already arrived in a suburb of Chicago to begin training. Unless the Insurrection Act is invoked, we would expect that these National Guard men and women would not be able to use weapons, to be able to make arrests, to do anything that really looks like policing, that would still be left to federal agents like ICE and Border Patrol or to local police there. And that really they're there as a deterrent, as a show of force, much like what we saw here in Washington, D.C. this summer.
Right. And speaking with White House officials, they certainly like those images. They want the video to serve as a deterrent of those troops, in their view, swarming some of these Democratic-run cities. Kelly, I want to switch to you. Attorney General Bondi, she was very combative. I know you were watching this hearing earlier. Was she basically testifying for an audience of one?
In many ways, certainly the message that she delivered was intended to reach President Trump, but it also showed that she came in prepared for what she knew would be tough questioning. And so what stood out to me in part is that she was so combative with Senate Democrats that it seemed as if she had an oppo file on a number of them. bringing up some controversies that they have experienced that are sometimes many years old as a way to fight back in conversations. She was also very clear that she didn't want to talk about any private discussions she's had with the White House. There is an argument to be made for that a president deserves to have private counsel. But if you are asked if the president or the White House has discussed with the James Comey indictment with you at any time, there is an answer of no if that were the case. She could have taken that option. Instead, she shut down any discussion of her conversations.
Well, I want to play some more of what Senate Democrats had to say today. Let's listen.
What has taken place since January 20th, 2025 would make even President Nixon recoil. This is your legacy, Attorney General Bondi. In 8 short months, you have fundamentally transformed the Justice Department and left an enormous stain in American history.
The Department of Justice has become the Department of Revenge and Corruption. Rather than pursuing cases without fear or favor, this DOJ seeks to favor the president's friends and instill fear in his alleged enemies. If you're a friend of the president, this corrupt DOJ will bend over backwards to help you.
And Kelly, what did you make of how Attorney General Bondi responded to those criticisms? Is there an erosion of trust in the DOJ? Bigger picture here.
There is such a different view of what is weaponization, and it's really defined by which party these members adhere to, or perhaps the public watching as well. So Republicans were arguing, and so was the Attorney General, that weaponization is over, that was from a past era. But Democrats see a number of things they brought up. The handling of terminations of a number of career officials, prosecutors, FBI agents, and so forth, being fired without cause. They see that as politically motivated. And so there was a lot of tension. It was very partisan. One of the big questions is, did they get at any new answers? And on some of the key issues, I think that remains to be seen.
And before I let you go, there was a lot of discussion today about an FBI investigation called Arctic Frost. Explain to our viewers what that is.
This goes back to the time around January 6th when investigators were looking at how were false electors who might have given President Trump at that time the 2020 election. How did that come about? And so the FBI, through court approval, was able to get phone records of several senators to see who they were calling. Were they talking to the White House? Were they talking to people who were involved in the false elector scheme? Republicans are very upset about this, and we heard calls today for a special prosecutor to investigate.
Before I let you all go, Yamiche, I want to go back to you outside the White House. Have you heard from any White House officials about their response to Attorney General Bondi's testimony today? Were they pleased by her performance?
It's a good question. I haven't heard directly from White House officials about their responses, but what I do know is that the president has been very clear that he's praised Attorney General Pam Bondi on multiple occasions, even when there was a lot of questions about how she was handling the Epstein files and the Epstein case, as well as other things. So I suspect that the White House liked what they saw, especially because essentially Attorney General Pam Bondi dodged a lot of questions, especially when it came to her conversations with President Trump. So I imagine, just based on my reporting in the past, that they will be pleased with what they saw today.
Michelle Sindor, Kelly O'Donnell, Julia Ainsley, thank you all so much for joining me. And coming up, 1 week into the government shutdown, we'll get an update on where negotiations stand and the White House's latest threat to skirt the law and withhold back pay for federal workers. Plus, renewed hope for peace in Gaza. Negotiators hold a second day of high in Israel as we mark 2 years since the October 7th terror attack. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. With no sign of progress in solving the government shutdown, some federal workers are set to miss part of their paychecks on Friday. It comes as NBC News confirms the authenticity of a draft White House memo, which was first reported by Axios, suggesting furloughed federal workers are not entitled to back pay when the shutdown ends, despite a 2019 law requiring it. In the Oval Office today, the president said he'd follow the law, but did not back down from the threat.
I would say it depends on who we're talking about. I can tell you this, the Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way.
It also comes as Republicans have largely defended the president's authority to fire workers during a shutdown. Yesterday, my colleague Amish Sindor spoke with former OMB Director Shalanda Young about what, if any, authority the president legally has.
I've done this on the Capitol Hill side when I was staff director of the Appropriations Committee. As director of OMB, I can promise you there is no law that kicks in to say that you can fire federal workers during a shutdown. You get no new legal authority whether the government's open or shut down. As a matter of fact, it should be harder legally because you're only supposed to have people work who have critical missions, meaning our men and women who are serving overseas, doing critical jobs to ensure that the American people are safe. So you mean to tell me that the president is saying an HR official is being brought in at the same level as our troops to carry out these mass firings? That doesn't make sense, and I don't think it makes sense legally.
And even if this becomes a legal battle, I wonder what you think of just federal workers who might lose their jobs and then maybe try to fight back, but that's, of course, going to take time and money.
Again, this has been happening. This tearing down, this attack on federal workers, I think my successor has said that was the point of going after federal workers, to terrorize them. You know, this should not come as a surprise to people. This administration has not been quiet about their intentions. Look at Project 2025. There's a full embrace of something that the president told us he was not going to do. This is all laid out, whether the government's open or shut down.
I take that point. I wonder, do you think that these layoffs haven't happened yet because there might be legal obstacles here?
Because it was a threat. That's why it hasn't happened. It was Democrats do as I say. We're not going to sit down with you. We're not going to address Americans' health care issues. By the way, Yamiche, they know they need to. They know politically they need to address this. They don't want the American people to know that Democrats are the one that forced the issue. They know they have to.
Do you think Democrats should be willing to compromise? And if so, what should they be willing to compromise? As someone who worked, of course, in the Democratic administration.
Democrats should be willing to compromise. Republicans should be willing to compromise. You don't know what that is until you sit down and negotiate. That's what's missing. That is where Republicans have just turned their back on tradition and precedent and the will of the American people. A refusal to sit down with the other body, to come to some compromise, to deal with this healthcare crisis that, frankly, they did on their own over the summer. Think about this. They took care of tax cuts that primarily benefit the wealthy months earlier than their expiration. And now they're telling the American people, well, we have time to wait on health care. Where was the urgency for health care that you have for tax cuts? And as a matter of fact, we don't have time. Premiums are going up now. Letters are going out now. As a matter of fact, insurers really wanted this to be dealt with over the summer. So the urgency is now, and that's why you see Democrats holding their ground.
And meanwhile, as the shutdown drags on, the immediate consequences for Americans across the country are starting to come into focus. By the end of this weekend, Smithsonian museums and research institutions are set to close. Next week, potentially federal courts. By the end of the month, funding for the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Assistance Program could lapse. And on November 1st, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. Also November 1st, the beginning of open enrollment for next year's Affordable Care Act plans. Tax credits for the ACA are set to expire this year, and with it, out-of-pocket premiums will rise. The deadline is central to the demands by Democrats in this shutdown negotiation, and there's some evidence on Capitol Hill that Republicans are beginning to feel the pressure. Senator Lisa Murkowski telling NBC News, quote, "It feels like we lost the momentum from last week," and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene breaking with her party, calling for action on the ACA subsidies and claiming Republican leadership has not offered a plan. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is NBC's Melanie Zanona. Mel, thanks so much for joining us. We've been asking this for about a week now, but is there any sign of progress on a deal?
Yeah, it feels a bit like Groundhog's Day here on Capitol Hill. There are no serious signs of progress or a breakthrough. The Senate continues to hold these votes on the GOP stopgap spending bill. Those votes continue to fail, and only the same 3 Senate Democrats are voting with Republicans to reopen the government. And in fact, one of those senators, Angus King, is now saying he might flip his vote and start voting no if this goes on. Just take a listen.
I'm contemplating changing my vote unless the Republicans are more forthcoming about dealing with the ACA problem. The best we got was last Friday when the leader said he was open to conversations. That's not good enough. We need to deal with this problem. I was in the expectation that there would be some more forthcoming assurances about dealing with this issue, and it just hasn't happened.
So that would be a sign that things are actually regressing instead of progressing. And meanwhile, the GOP leadership and Democratic leadership aren't even talking at this point. They have not met since their White House meeting with President Trump last Monday. So I think we're still a few days, if not weeks, away from this ending.
So Mel, you mentioned that the leadership isn't talking. Well, yesterday the president suggested he was talking to some Democrats, possibly moderate Democrats, about a health care deal. Before then he walked it back. What are you hearing from Democrats? Was there any truth to that? Was the White House speaking with some of them?
We talked to Democratic leaders. We talked to other Democrats who have been really key leaders on this Affordable Care Act subsidy issue. Everyone says they are not talking with Trump right now. And he also did clarify later that he is not having conversations and that also he would only have negotiations on this issue if Democrats open the government first. So that has been the Republican position. He did undermine it a little bit with those comments yesterday, but it seems the GOP is on the same page on this front. But we've always thought that one potential way out of this shutdown is a deal on Affordable Care Act subsidies. And there is some reporting that perhaps the GOP is starting to get a little nervous about some of these premiums hiking, going up if Congress doesn't act. So potentially maybe that could be a way out. I just think we're very far away from any sort of deal.
And Mel, on that exact point, we mentioned those comments from Marjorie Taylor Greene a little earlier. She's just one Republican that is often at odds with leadership, but is she a potential bellwether for the MAGA movement on this issue, breaking with her party?
Yeah, you're totally right. She is just one Republican. She often is at odds with her own party. For example, she was one of the lone Republicans to sign on to the Jeffrey Epstein discharge petition. But at the same time, Gabe, she is someone who really has her finger on the pulse of the MAGA base. And perhaps more importantly, she still has the ear of President Donald Trump. So if she were to back channel with him and try to convince him that is in his best interest to cut a deal with Democrats on this issue, maybe Trump tries to be a leader on this issue and really does try to co-opt it from Democrats. Again, that could be a way out of the shutdown. It just hasn't happened yet.
Very interesting. Look, we also heard from the president and Trump suggesting that some federal workers would not get their back pay if, in his words, they don't deserve it. Now, the back pay issue is law, and it was actually signed during his first term. How are Republicans reacting to that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really delicate dance, as usual, for Republicans here. Speaker Mike Johnson, for example, says he hopes that federal workers get paid. But at the same time, he showed some deference to the administration and said, I'm aware that there are some memos and legal analysis out there that perhaps they aren't entitled or they don't have to be paid back pay. John Thune, the Senate GOP leader, similarly just said, I'm not sure what they're talking about, really dodging the question there because it really is such a tricky issue that Americans are potentially going to suffer because of this shutdown. And at this point, it's unclear which party is actually going to get the blame. There is some polling that show, at least at this moment, still early, Republicans, Trump are getting slightly more of the blame than Democrats. But the White House clearly upping the ante here by threatening to not only lay off federal employees, it hasn't happened yet, but something they're threatening, and now threatening to not even give them back pay. We've never seen that in the shutdown fight before. So just really dramatically upping the stakes here on Capitol Hill and all around the country, really,
so,
Gabe.
Back to that question we started out with that everyone seems to be asking. A week into the shutdown, is there any sense of when we could see any kind of movement here?
That is a really great $1 million question, Gabe. Right now, they're going to have another vote at some point in the Senate on the GOP stopgap spending bill. So we'll be monitoring that vote count very closely for any signs of potential movement, see if more Democrats vote for it. Maybe some Democrats don't vote for it, like we said with Angus King. But in terms of a breakthrough, I think the next thing we're looking for is whether they're going to meet again. That is something that could help start to break the impasse. But like I said, they're not even talking right now. The House isn't even here. It's a very weird shutdown, having covered a bunch of these things. Usually members are here through the night, working around the clock, working through the weekend. That hasn't been the case. So it's clear that neither side is feeling the pressure just yet, but there are some pain points coming up, including this Friday when federal workers will miss their first paycheck.
That's right. It does seem very quiet behind you, Mel. I expected a tumbleweed perhaps during your live shot, but Mel Zanona live for us on the Hill. Mel, thank you. And up next, commemorations across the world today, marking 2 years since the devastating October 7th attack on Israel, as the fight to get all the hostages released and end the fighting in Gaza rages on. A family member whose brother-in-law is still being held captive by Hamas joins me here in studio. You're watching Meet the Press now. And welcome back. Today marks 2 years since Hamas's October 7th terror attack on Israel, which led to a crushing military response by Israeli forces in Gaza and plunged the region into war. 7th was the deadliest single day in Israel's history. Today across the country, Israelis gathered to remember the 1,200 people killed and demand the return of the nearly 50 hostages that remain in Hamas captivity. About 20 of those hostages are believed to still be alive. In Egypt, meanwhile, indirect talks to discuss the implementation of President Trump's 20-point peace plan and address the spiraling humanitarian crisis in Gaza continued for a second day today. The plan would require Hamas to release all remaining Israeli hostages, which Hamas says it will do. It would also require Israel to end the war and withdraw from most of Gaza. The negotiations in Egypt represent the latest and perhaps best chance to end the war that has killed more than 67,000 people in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry, and displaced the majority of Gaza's nearly 2 million residents. Joining me now from Jerusalem is NBC News' chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. Richard, good to have you. Where do peace talks stand right now, and what was the focus of this second day of negotiations?
So we've just received a statement from Hamas saying that it supports these peace negotiations. It is working hard to implement President Trump's plan. So on first reading, it sounds very positive until you get to the end of the statement, in which Hamas is talking about ambiguities in the peace plan and that there must be guarantees to make Israel stop its attacks on Gaza, because the war is still continuing. President Trump, when this deal was announced, that he and Prime Minister Netanyahu had both agreed to this 20-point peace plan, President Trump said that Israel should immediately stop its bombing campaign to allow Hamas to gather the hostages and begin the process of releasing them. That never happened. The Israeli attacks never slowed down, and dozens of Palestinians have been killed since the peace plan was initially announced, according to health officials in Gaza. And then today, Hamas fired rockets into Israel. So the war is still actively ongoing, and there are disputes among the negotiators about the pace and scale of the Israeli military withdrawal. Israel says it will withdraw effectively at a time and place of its choosing, staying around a buffer zone at the edges of Gaza, and that it will withdraw when there is security and then when Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Those are very vague commitments. Hamas is also being vague about its commitments, saying that it will hand over its weapons and no longer rule Gaza when there is an alternative Palestinian leadership and alternative Palestinian security forces. And at this stage, no one has named who those future Palestinian leaders would be or who's going to provide the security forces. So there is some hope because the talks are ongoing and they are high level and they are ongoing, and both sides seem to express support or are expressing support for the peace plan. But there are wide gaps about its implementation and the future of the Gaza Strip.
And Richard, you talked about these concessions, that they're vague. Is there any sense for a timeline at this point, or any sense for when the U.S. administration might lose patience with the pace of these talks?
Well, when the U.S. might lose patience is a difficult question to answer, because a lot of that depends on the personality of President Trump and what his envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner, who are both in Egypt for these talks, relate to him. But The most immediate thing to look out for is the handover of hostages. That potentially could happen quickly. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that it could happen by Monday. The White House says that it wants it to happen soon. There's been talk by some U.S. administration officials that they want it to happen by the end of this weekend. So there could be some movement on the hostages relatively quickly, which could create a lot of momentum. But these larger issues about the future of the Gaza Strip, who's going to run it, who's going to rebuild, what happens to Hamas and its weapons, and where and when Israeli troops withdraw and where they withdraw to, all of those are still open questions.
Richard Engel reporting live for us in Israel. Richard, thank you. I'm joined now by Moshe Lavi, whose brother-in-law, Omri Miran, is being held hostage by Hamas. Thank you so much for joining us, Moshe. I want to start off by asking you, when was the last time that you saw pictures of your brother-in-law?
Thank you for having me. The last time we saw Omri in a footage was in a psychological warfare video Hamas published in late April, about a week after his birthday. It was released purposefully to mark his birthday, his second birthday in captivity. He looked unwell, much worse than the first psychological warfare video they released a year earlier. Obviously under duress, starved, tortured. But we focus on the fact that he's alive. We focus on the fact that he's composed in the video. And irrespective of what he was told to say, we could see in his eyes that Omri is still there. And we can bring him home to my sister Lishai and my two baby nieces, Ronnie and Alma.
This must be a hard day for you.
It is very difficult. As I told you earlier, every day is difficult since October the 7th, both from a personal perspective, our family trauma, the advocacy work to release Omri and all the remaining hostages, but also from a national perspective. Israel has not recovered really from what has happened that day, and we will not recover and heal until this war will end and we'll see the return of all the hostages.
And on that point, how optimistic are you that this war will end soon?
I will say that I remain hopeful. I'm hopeful all the time because without hope, we will have no energy and motivation to continue advocating with policymakers. As we did even this morning with the U.S. administration, they gathered with us to mark October the 7th in a sukkah we built. And he just showed us again how much the Trump administration is behind us, is supporting our efforts.
And I was about to mention that breakfast that you had this morning with other hostage families and senior members of the Trump administration. What was your message to those White House officials?
Our message to them, and my sister gave a speech during that breakfast, was keep going. Please push the negotiations as fast and hard as you can. Support the president in his bold plan to bring about a peaceful resolution to this conflict, and don't sidetrack. We need to focus on negotiations on the first 72 hours to release the hostages.
I was in the room last week when President Trump was with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he announced that 20-point peace plan. When you heard what the president was proposing, what went through your head?
I felt that for the first time, a policymaker is able to bring about a concrete proposal that solves first the hostage crisis and then address other root causes of this conflict. And he did it by building an international coalition with the wider Arab world, wider Muslim world, and of course other allies of the U.S. It gives me a lot of hope.
So, and we've heard about other potential breakthroughs in all of these negotiations. Does this time feel different?
It does feel different, and because, as I said, there is an international coalition, and I haven't seen so much pressure exerted on Hamas as it is currently by Qatar, by Turkey, their sponsors and funders, and by the wider international community. But we're still grounded in reality. We know how complex it is, and that we're negotiating with a terrorist organization that says one thing one day and the other the next. Only before this interview, I've read some of the statements Hamas said officially and unofficially to Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and other media outlets in the Arab world. Sometimes they contradict each other and contradict what is reported to us by diplomats who are handling the negotiations.
In your mind, aside from the release of all the Israeli hostages, what absolutely needs to be part of any deal to end this war?
I think it's important and imperative, both for Israelis and Gazans who are suffering from Hamas, to disarm and disband Hamas as part of the wider vision for the region. We cannot allow terrorist organization to rule a population, to radicalize the population. I want to live side by side with my Palestinian neighbors. I want to see them with self-determination in Gaza, in the Judea and Samaria, the west part of Judea and Samaria, and the West Bank, because they deserve it just like us Israelis deserve self-determination.
Now, Hamas has said that it has agreed to relinquish control of Gaza. Do you take the group at its word?
I don't. I want to be frank with everyone. Nobody should believe Hamas. It has lied before and it has deceived both Israelis and Gazans since they took over the Gaza Strip. But we have to focus on the small achievements and victories we can achieve now. Releasing the hostages and perhaps creating a path in which Gaza is de-radicalized, and so Hamas can be overthrown in the long run.
And to that point, can there be any lasting peace in the Middle East with Hamas in power?
If you've asked an average European 100 years ago whether there can be peace in Europe, he would have laughed at your face. Europe has fought for centuries. I don't know if I'll see peace in my lifetime in the Middle East, but I know eventually we'll find a resolution. I hope it will be in my lifetime and that my nieces, Roni and Alma, will see peace in our time. But until then, we have to be strong. We have to be strong both in the battlefield and, most importantly, in the diplomatic world.
And Moshe, thank you again so much for joining us. Before I let you go on this October 7th, tell us, what are you thinking most about your brother-in-law? Tell one memory that you can share of him so that the focus stays on him.
What I think most is his wedding day with my sister Lishai. It was in the pool in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, which was ravaged on October the 7th. It was one of the happiest days of my life to see a man who gives so much joy to my sister, because my family matters to me more than anything. And I knew from the first time I met him that this is the man who will bring joy to our family and to my sister. And I can't wait to celebrate his return, to see him embrace Lishai and my nieces, Roni and Alma, to see him hug his father, Danny, and his siblings. He's an amazing human being, a shiatsu therapist and a gardener, a man of peace, of love, and he deserves to be free. He deserves to be free from tyranny and from the captivity he is in.
Moshe Lavi, thank you so much for sharing your family's story. Our thoughts are with you and your family on this difficult day. Thank you. And we'll be right back with more Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. And welcome back. As we've reported, expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies are at the center of the shutdown fight, with Democrats demanding an extension and Republicans holding firm that discussions on an extension cannot start until Democrats agree to reopen the government. So what do voters think? Polling shows extending those credits is popular, with majorities of Americans across all parties supporting them, including a majority of MAGA supporters. And among those who support those, majority say they would blame the president or congressional Republicans if they are not extended. So joining me now is our panel. Idris Kaloun, staff writer for The Atlantic. Arshi Siddiqui, former senior aide to Speaker Pelosi and founder and CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs. And Michael Dubke, former Trump White House communications director. Thank you all so much for joining us. Idris, I want to start with you. How significant is November 1st going forward? That's if this shutdown lasts that long, could we see a shift in public opinion, because that's when open enrollment starts?
Yeah, it's when a lot of things happen. So SNAP benefits will become affected. I think right now a lot of Americans are not really reacting to the shutdown because it hasn't started to affect their day-to-day life. But SNAP benefits would be affected, and these ACA enrollments would be affected. So what's at stake now between Democrats and Republicans are these subsidies that are expiring. And to make that clear, that means that right now, for the 20 million or so people who are on these Affordable Care Act health insurance plans, they're paying about $900 a year in premiums. That would go up to about $1,900 if these expire.
So, Arshi, does that ramp up pressure on Democrats?
No, I think if anything, this is the first time after the Republican reconciliation bill where this issue has been in play and Democrats have had a seat at the table. Now, unfortunately, that seat at the table, nobody has invited them to the room yet. So far, it's been, let's have one meeting, but no negotiation. And I think this is the opportunity to really drive that urgency home, because these letters are going to come out and millions of Americans are going to have to make choices on open enrollment in terms of their budgets going into next year.
So, Michael, we show those numbers that most people do want these tax credits extended. Is it a mistake for Republicans not to negotiate on them now?
If this whole shutdown becomes about these credits and the Affordable Care Act, yes, but this shutdown isn't really only about that. That's what the Democrats want to make it about. But the Republicans have offered to, if Democrats move forward, open the government again. They can sit down at the table, invite them into the room, it sounds like, and have these conversations about extending these credits, because the president has mentioned that these need to be extended. In his mind, Republicans recognize that, but we're not going to get there until we open the government back up again.
Well, look, you said that Democrats want to shift the conversation to these credits, but earlier in the show we were talking about, look, just one Republican, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is now coming back and saying that, this could be a problem moving forward. Now, I never thought I'd see the day when Marjorie Taylor Greene is seen as like the moderate, the voice of reason here.
Voice of reason, yes.
But what do you make of that? How significant is it? Is she a bellwether for the MAGA movement? And could others in the MAGA movement potentially be very worried if these subsidies are not extended?
No, I think she's an outlier in terms of speaking up now, because we do have time. We can get the government open. We can have these conversations, and we can make the November 1st deadline. But she is absolutely correct that if this keeps dragging on and we go to this place, the midterms, this will become an issue in the midterms. Okay. So she's recognizing that.
Okay, Idris, do you think she's an outlier here in this conversation?
She might be a leading indicator, but I think that the modern Republican Party is a lot more comfortable with the big welfare state than previously. If you remember, for a long time, for 10 years, the Republican Party was about dismantling Obamacare, and now it is so baked into healthcare decisions that Americans make that people are willing to go for it.
Now, Arshay, Leader Jeffries was asked about a one-year extension of these Obamacare, of these tax credits. That's been previously proposed by Republicans, but he called it a non-starter. Are Democrats risking being too rigid here?
I mean, first of all, there needs to be any negotiation in the press. So I think if he gets to the table and has that discussion, but I would actually push back a little bit on Idris's point on where Republicans are on this. They had an opportunity in the reconciliation bill. They could have extended these. CBO actually did call that 5 million individuals would lose their health care. None of this is a surprise. So there was a deliberate decision not to act. So I would just say on the Jeffries point is that it is all about getting to the table, and that's where you can have that back and forth to find common ground and get an off-ramp.
But as long as the government's closed, that room is going to be locked and the table will be empty.
Until there is actually an invitation to negotiate.
Okay. Well, I want to switch topics here to something that we were, discussing earlier in the show, this deployment of troops across the country. Obviously, the administration is running into some legal battles here, Michael. But what do you make of, I don't know if you saw it, but there was this montage earlier in the show where we were playing sound bites of President Trump and White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller repeatedly using the word insurrection to describe this. Do you think that the administration is trying to work its way up to invoking the Insurrection Act here, and would they be justified in doing so?
I think that the administration is keeping all of their options open, and by utilizing words such as insurrection and talking about the Insurrection Act here, he is keeping the pressure up on cities like Chicago and governors like the governor of Illinois to keep all of their options open on when and where to deploy the National Guard for various reasons. And we've had different reasons in L.A., Washington, D.C., Memphis, and Chicago and Portland.
Keeping options open. But today, the president said that Democrats are like insurrectionists. Are we diluting the meaning of the word here?
There are, as I am not a lawyer, but I am sure for all those lawyers that are watching out there, there are very specific terms around insurrection. I don't think he's diluting the word, but if you look at the Insurrection Act, one of the concerns everyone has is how vague the act is. So I don't think we're there. I don't think we're going to get there. He did not invoke it in his first term. But I do think he's keeping his options open.
Well, are Democrats keeping their options open here? Do you think that are they playing this the right way, basically? They're challenging this in the courts. Is there anything else they could be doing? Or are they capitalizing on this politically like they should?
Well, I think the challenge here is that this, in some ways, is a distraction in the sense that it's a made-for-TV reality show, and I think the president is really good at that. So I think the courts is the actual place to really push back here, and rule of law is important, and we've seen a threat to rule of law. So from that perspective, I think Democrats are so focused, and this is why we go back to the shutdown, is the cost of living issues that were front and center for these last few years, post-COVID, are still front and center, and that is the focus on the Democratic side.
And Idris, this week in Illinois, Senator Tammy Duckworth said that the Illinois Guard would be welcome because, they're, quote, our neighbors. But now we're seeing potentially other states like Texas say they're sending in the National Guard. Is this where we would have the potential for things to spiral out of control here, to have these guards from different states?
Well, I think you've already seen that in Washington, D.C. You have 2,200 troops that are currently here. A lot of them are from outside states. You see that in California as well. So far, thankfully, that hasn't escalated into any serious conflict, so I hope that continues to be the case.
Also, the D.C. mayor has made the decision to at least welcome them in some way. It has not opposed them like some other Democratic local leaders have.
Yeah, but we haven't seen these deployments are unprecedented given the last time the Insurrection Act, for example, was mentioned or raised was H.W. Bush, L.A. riots. We don't see anything like that today. Mm-hmm. But generally, I think that peace is held so far, and even as the Trump administration pushes the envelope, I don't know that they'll provoke kind of big violent reaction.
And Michael, I want to end with you here as we're running out of time. Last year, then Governor Kristi Noem, she railed against the idea proposed by some Democrats that back then President Biden should federalize the Texas Guard over an immigration dispute. Are Republicans worried about the expansion of federal power here? Could this come back to bite them in a Democratic administration?
Look, I think any time you've got an incident like this, you do worry about it coming back to bite them. When you go outside the norms and you are in power and then you're out of power, you worry about that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael. Idris, Archie, thank you all so much for joining me here on the panel. And still to come, Democrats' uphill battle to win back some control of Congress. Steve Kornacki standing by at the big board to break down brand new polling on the road to the midterms. Keep it here. You're watching Meet the Press now. And welcome back. Democrats are counting on next year's midterms to win back at least some control of Congress, but the party has some major political headwinds. NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki joins me now, and he's at the big board. Steve, why should Democrats be nervous at this point?
It's a little interesting right now, Gabe, about a year out from the midterms. Here, look, Donald Trump's approval ratings are certainly nothing to write home about. And this is what Democrats are looking at in terms of a challenge to take back the House, the current balance of power. With those vacancies, if they are filled the way we expect them to be, it would be 220 seats for the Republicans. There it is, 220 for the Republicans, 215 for the Democrats. And that would mean Democrats really would only need a net gain of 3 seats to get the House. Now, keep in mind, Republicans are trying to redraw maps in a number of states right now to boost that total. So there may be more of a pad here for Republicans than meets the eye when you just look at this balance of power. So that's one challenge for Democrats. But of course, Democrats are hoping that this goes like the midterm did in Trump's first term. And if it did, this would be nothing because Democrats gained 40 seats. It was a blue wave in Trump's midterm. So the thing about that midterm the first time around was you could see it coming from a long way away. October 2017, more than a year out, the generic ballot asking folks which party do you want to see control Congress. Democrats were leading on average in the generic ballot by nearly 8 points. And this was the level they basically maintained through all of 2018, right up to Election Day, right up to the blue wave when they gained 40 seats and flipped the House. So where is the generic ballot right now? Well, Democrats lead it, but not by nearly as much. It's a 3-point average lead for Democrats on the generic ballot now. So again, this is not terrible news for Democrats, but there was clarity even at this point in 2018 that something was coming. This number suggests you're not at that point right now. And one of the reasons Democrats may not be at the point has to do with this, the image of each party. Again, looking back here at October of 2017, if you looked at all the polling back then, neither party was popular, but one party was a lot less popular than the other. Republicans in Trump's first term, 27% average favorable score at this point. Democrats were up at 39%. There was a pretty clear imbalance there. It worked to the favor of Democrats. What do you have right now when you run these same numbers? Well, again, neither one's popular, but the Republicans are sitting at 41 favorable, the Democrats at 35 favorable. The Democrats are less popular than the Republicans now. And that's one of the things when you look at midterm elections, the opposition party counts on getting a bit of a boost just from being sort of the protest vehicle for anyone who's got issues with the White House. Democrats, though, with numbers like that, you got to worry a little bit. Are people wanting to send a message to them as well, Gabe?
Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, thanks so much for watching it all for us. And thank you for watching at home. I'm Gabe Gutierrez, and we're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. But there's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.